It started with a smell. Not the kind you notice immediately, but the kind that slowly creeps into your senses, clinging to the air, growing heavier the longer you stay. Neighbors had complained about it for months, maybe years, but no one ever pushed hard enough to investigate. After all, the apartment looked normal. Quiet. Ordinary. Too ordinary. On a cold morning in November 2011, police officers finally stood outside the door of a modest apartment in Nizhny Novgorod, Russia. Journalists had already begun to gather outside, sensing something unusual. No one knew exactly what they were about to uncover, but everyone felt it. Something was wrong. When the officers knocked, there was no panic inside, no attempt to flee, no sudden movement, just silence, followed by the slow creak of a door opening. Behind it stood a thin, pale man with tired eyes. Calm, almost indifferent. His name was Anatoly. He didn't resist. He didn't run. He simply stepped aside and let them in. At first glance, the apartment looked like any other from the Soviet era. Old furniture, shelves filled with books, porcelain dolls neatly arranged on top of cabinets. Nothing seemed out of place until they walked into his room. That's when everything changed. The first thing they noticed was the smell. Stronger now, rotten, damp, sweet in a way that made your stomach twist. Then they saw them. At least 24 figures were sitting around the room. On chairs, on the couch. Some were arranged around a small table, as if they were having tea together. Tiny cups were placed carefully in front of them, like a child's tea party frozen in time. At first, it looked strange but harmless, like a collection, like dolls, until someone got closer. One of the investigators reached out and touched one of them. That's when the illusion shattered. It wasn't a doll. It was a body. Small, light, wrong. The room went silent. No one spoke. No one moved. Then, one of the witnesses collapsed. She didn't scream at first. Her body just gave out. When she woke up moments later, she began to shake uncontrollably, clutching her face, refusing to look at anything around her. I won't touch anything. I won't touch anything. Get me out of here. Her voice cracked into hysteria. Even the officers, trained, experienced, had to step outside, one by one, unable to process what they were seeing. Because those weren't mannequins. They were the mummified remains of children. 26 of them, all dressed, all positioned, all preserved. Some of them had music boxes hidden inside their bodies. When investigators moved them, faint melodies began to play. Children's songs. Soft, distorted. One of them whispered mechanically, "Papa, I love you." The sound echoed through the apartment like something alive. Something that shouldn't exist. Inside some of the bodies, investigators found personal items, hospital tags, pieces of clothing, even fragments of gravestones sewn into the fabric. Each one had a name. Each one had a story. And to Anatoly, each one was his daughter. During the interrogation, he remained calm. Too calm. "I love them," he said. "They were abandoned. You threw them away. I gave them a home." The officers stared at him, unsure if they were speaking to a madman or something far worse. For 10 years, Anatoly had been visiting cemeteries across the region. Hundreds of them. He walked miles, sometimes over 30 kilometers a day, searching, watching, waiting. And we found what he was looking for. He dug. At night, alone, he would open graves, break into coffins, and take what remained. Small bodies, fragile, decaying. He brought them back to life in his own way. He used salt and baking soda to dry them. He stuffed them with cloth, wrapped them in tights, rebuilt them piece by piece. He gave them faces, buttons for eyes, toy heads, anything that could make them look less dead, less gone. When he was done, he dressed them in children's clothes and sat them beside him. He talked to them, watched cartoons with them, celebrated imaginary moments. A family that never existed. But the most disturbing part, he didn't think he was doing anything wrong. "I wanted children," he explained during questioning. "I tried to adopt. They refused me." His voice remained steady, almost logical. "They said I didn't have enough money, that I couldn't provide for a child. But I could. I would have been a good father." There was no anger in his tone, just disappointment, loneliness. Years earlier, he had begged his parents to let him adopt a girl from an orphanage. They hesitated. They doubted him. They feared he wouldn't manage. They weren't wrong, but they had no idea what their son would become. One day, after a heated argument, he left the house in rage. He walked to a cemetery to calm down. That's where everything began. He found a small, almost forgotten grave. A little girl. No visitors. No flowers. No one to remember her. Something inside him shifted. That same night, he came back. He dug, slowly, carefully, until he reached the coffin. He broke it open and pulled her out. What he found inside was not peaceful. The body was already decomposing. Insects, rot, the natural process of death in its rawest form. Most people would have run. He didn't. Instead, he made a decision. He would save her. He carried the body to another part of the cemetery and began experimenting. Salt, baking soda, drying techniques. Week after week, he returned, replacing soaked materials, monitoring the process like a scientist obsessed with his work. To anyone watching, he had an excuse. "I'm feeding birds," he would say. No one questioned him. No one looked closer. Months later, he carried her home in a backpack. That was the first. After that, it became easier. Too easy. Back in the apartment, his parents lived with him. Elderly, unaware. They saw the dolls. They smelled something strange. But they trusted their son. They believed he was creating something harmless. They never imagined they were living among the dead. For months, one of the bodies even stayed in their room. They had no idea. None. When the truth finally came out, their lives collapsed. Neighbors turned against them. Strangers vandalized their home. People shouted insults from street. They became prisoners of shame. Their son had turned their lives into a nightmare. But for Anatoly, this wasn't the end. It was only the beginning of something much deeper. Because the real question wasn't just what he did. It was why. And the answer goes back much further than anyone expected. Back to a moment in his childhood. A moment that should never have happened. A moment that changed everything. Long before the graves, before the dolls, before the whispers in that apartment. There was a boy. A quiet boy. Brilliant, disciplined, almost invisible to the world around him. Teachers admired him. Adults described him as gifted. He spent most of his time alone, buried in books, learning languages most people would never even attempt. But other children didn't see brilliance. They saw weakness. They mocked him, isolated him, treated him like something strange, something easy to break. And one day, something inside him did break. He was only 11 years old. It was supposed to be a normal school activity, collecting old paper from apartment buildings. A simple task, harmless, until he saw the coffin. It stood there, right at the entrance of a building, open. Inside was a girl. Her name was Natasha. She had died suddenly, an electric shock in her home. One moment alive, the next gone. Just 11 years old, the same age as him. He should have walked away, but he didn't, because someone called him. A woman, her mother, crying, desperate, unstable. She approached him, placed something in his hand, an apple. Then she kissed his forehead and gently pulled him closer to the coffin. At first, he resisted. He cried. He begged to leave, but the people around him didn't let him go. They surrounded him, men and women dressed in black, holding candles, whispering words he didn't understand. Not Russian, something older, something darker, a ritual, and he was part of it. They forced him closer, closer, until he was standing right above her body. Her skin was pale, cold, still. The woman leaned in and whispered promises, candy, money, rewards. All he had to do was kiss her, just one kiss. But it didn't stop at one. They forced his head down, again, and again, and again. Each time, his lips touched the lifeless skin of a dead girl. Each time, something inside him twisted. Then they gave him a candle and told him to drip wax onto her dress. He obeyed. He didn't understand why, but he obeyed. Finally, they placed 2 rings in his hands. Old, worn. One was slipped onto the girl's finger, the other onto his. And in that moment, surrounded by chanting voices and flickering candlelight, they told him he was now married to her, married to the dead. That night, something followed him home. At first, it was just dreams. She appeared in them, Natasha, standing in the dark, watching him, singing softly, but without melody, without warmth. Night after night, she returned, sometimes closer, sometimes clearer, until it no longer felt like dreams. He began to feel her presence, even when he was awake. A coldness in the room, a shadow behind him, a voice without sound. She spoke to him, not with words, but with something deeper. And what she wanted was for him to learn, to understand, to follow. He tried to resist. Of course he did. He was a child, terrified, confused, alone. His parents took him to a doctor, hoping for answers. Hormones, they said. Stress. Imagination. Nothing more. But it didn't stop. It never stopped. Years passed. He grew older, but the memory never faded. Instead, it evolved. It became an obsession, a fascination with death, not as an end, but as something incomplete, something unfinished, something that could be reversed. He began studying languages, history, rituals, anything that could bring him closer to understanding what he had experienced that day. He became a scholar, a teacher, a man respected for his intelligence. But inside, that 11-year-old boy was still there, still standing in front of that coffin, still hearing those voices, still feeling that cold. Eventually, his obsession took a new form. Cemeteries. He visited them constantly, not occasionally, constantly, hundreds of them. He walked for hours, sometimes days, documenting graves, studying names, dates, patterns. He wasn't just visiting. He was searching, looking for something or someone. And when his parents denied him the chance to adopt a child, something inside him snapped again, just like it had years ago. Except this time, he didn't stop himself. That's when the digging began. Back in the interrogation room, years later, investigators listened as he explained everything. Not with shame, not with regret, but with a strange kind of clarity. I felt sorry for them, he said. No one visited them. No one cared. They were alone. His eyes didn't show madness. They showed conviction. I gave them a home. The investigators exchanged glances. One of them finally asked the question no one could ignore anymore. Why preserve them? Why keep them? There was a pause. Then Anatoly leaned forward slightly. And for the first time, something changed in his expression. Not emotion, not fear, but intensity. I wanted to bring them back. Silence filled the room. At first, I just wanted to keep them, to protect them. But later, I realized something. He smiled faintly, a smile that didn't belong in that room. In the future, science will evolve. Cloning, restoration, life can return, but only if the body is preserved. One of the officers felt a chill run down his spine. You're saying you were preparing them? Yes. His answer came instantly, as material, for future revival. The room went still again. This wasn't just obsession. This wasn't just loneliness. This was something else entirely. A belief so deep it had replaced reality. He truly thought he was saving them, not destroying them, not violating them, saving them, giving them a second chance. And in his mind, one day they would wake up. His daughters, all 26 of them, waiting. Years of secrecy had convinced him he would never be caught. He thought he was careful, invisible, but in the end, it wasn't his actions that exposed him. It was something much simpler, a complaint, an investigation that had nothing to do with the graves. Authorities had come to his home for an entirely different reason, an article he had written that sparked controversy. 8 officers arrived that day, expecting paperwork. Instead, they found a nightmare. During the trial, the courtroom was filled with journalists, spectators, people desperate to understand how something like this could exist. They looked at him, searching for signs of a monster. But what they saw confused them. He didn't look like one. He spoke calmly, clearly, intelligently, like a professor explaining a theory. His colleagues described him as brilliant, polite, reliable, just eccentric, but nothing that would suggest this. Nothing that would explain 26 graves, 26 children. In the end, the court reached a decision. Not guilty, not because he was innocent, but because he was not sane. He was declared mentally unfit. No prison, no sentence. Instead, treatment. A psychiatric hospital. 6 months, they said. But 6 months turned into a year. Then another, and another. Each time the review came, the answer was the same. He wasn't ready to leave. Years passed. Inside the hospital, the man who once walked 30 kilometers a day slowed down. The medications took their toll. His movements became heavy. His speech unclear. He spent most of his time sleeping. Detached. Distant. The mind that once held 13 languages faded. When his parents visited, they brought him food, sat beside him, spoke to him, but he barely responded, except for one thing, one small detail. When they mentioned his cat, he smiled, just slightly, like a flicker of the person he used to be. Outside, the world moved on, but the damage remained. Families of the victims were left with something impossible to process. Some had to bury their children twice. Others lived with the knowledge that their loved ones had been taken, used, turned into something unrecognizable. And somewhere, deep inside a locked hospital room, a man still believed he had done something good, still believed that one day they would all come back. And if that day ever came, he wouldn't be remembered as a criminal, but as the one who saved them. Subscribe for more.